Shabbat Shalom, everyone. April 4th, which was this week, is the anniversary of the death of Martin Luther King Jr. And can you imagine, as his family gathered for his yahrzeit and contemplated his life, all the things that he had accomplished? But in his lifetime, civil rights didn't happen all at once. It was many small steps along the way. It was the buses in Montgomery. It was desegregating public spaces like restaurants and shops in Birmingham. It was voting rights in Selma. And you can imagine at each city, someone stood up and said, how is this going to help? If I can sit on the bus, how does that stop racism and poverty and lack of opportunity? This isn't what we need. But my argument today is that it's the small steps along the way that lead to the change we want to see in the world. Rabbi Rachel Travis, is a modern rabbi, and she comments on Parshat Tzav. And she notices that there's this cycle of sacrifices once again. And she says, do you think that the people ever despaired? They keep making the sacrifices, they come back the next week and have to make the same kind of sacrifice because they've made the same kind of mistake. She questions, is this a redemptive and transformative system that draws us closer to the messianic time and to God? But I would say yes. With each sacrifice, we get one step closer to making the world a better place. So let's take a huge problem and look at it right here in our city of Richardson. Poverty. There is now a movement across North Texas to address one aspect of poverty, and that is the predatory lenders. You may know them by a much softer name: cash loan, title loan, payday loan. Here's how the scenario works. Often, someone who has a full-time job but doesn't make a lot of money finds themselves in financial trouble. Usually, it's because they needed to repair their vehicle, which they need to get to work, or they've had some sort of minor medical need, like a broken bone, and when that bill comes, they can't afford to pay it. So they go to a legitimate bank, but the bank looks at their income and says, this person is not a good risk for us, we won't give them a loan. So they find themselves at a payday lender. Payday lenders, the data says, make over $7 billion a year on fees alone. Not actual loans that need to be paid back, but just the fees. And they charge around 400% interest. So you can imagine desperate families who need to get their car finding themselves deeper and deeper in debt, which leads to loss of home and loss of transportation to work, which isn't good for them, and it's not good for the rest of the citizens of the city if they're in need of government services or can no longer pay their taxes. It's not a good cycle. And so there are clergy and activists in the area who are asking the city of Richardson to put an ordinance in place that says, we're not zoned for predatory lenders. There will be no predatory lenders here in Richardson. Now, some of us are saying, yeah, but that doesn't really fix anything. It doesn't teach the people who go to payday lenders financial literacy. That's true. It doesn't stop the fact that even if you have a full-time job and are working hard, you can't afford something like a small medical expense. That's a problem. It doesn't mean that we have enough resources to offer in the city when these people get into that kind of trouble. But it does accomplish some things, right? You have to remember that each sacrifice we learn to make is a small step towards making the system better. So here's what it does. It takes one of the villains in the story of poverty out of the shadows and brings them into the light and says 400% interest is unacceptable, right? It raises awareness in our city that actually 10% of Richardson lives at or below the poverty line and is in need of solutions to the problem. And it tells our elected officials in the city, we want your help doing something about this. You know, sometimes for me, the injustice of the world becomes overwhelming, and I get swallowed up by my own sense of guilt that I'm not doing enough to make it better. It's like my own personal Egypt, right? I can't get out of it. But I asked a question earlier before the Torah reading. What is the advantage of admitting one's guilt in a public arena? Because one of the offerings we read about this morning was the guilt offering, which, by the way, you bring whether you're actually guilty of doing something or you just feel guilty or suspect you're guilty of doing something. And Rabbi Dorothy Richmond, who lives in the Bay Area, she wrote about this parsha, and she said there's an advantage to bringing the guilt offering, and there's two reasons. One is that it takes the guilt that's roiling around in your internal world, and it brings it out into the physical world, right? You're not trying to swallow it down, you're getting it out. And the second thing she said is when you bring a guilt offering, it's a step of action. You're actually trying to make amends for whatever went wrong. It moves us from feeling guilty to being responsible. So back to what can we do today? The word for sacrifice in Hebrew is a much nicer word. It's korban, and it means to draw close. It comes from the root kuf resh bet. And the whole point of the sacrifices was to try to draw ever closer to the divine and to recognize in ourselves the divine spark that is perfectly capable of redeeming the world, much like God redeemed us from Egypt, much like the Messiah will do at the end of days. And so maybe the modern equivalent of bringing a guilt sacrifice is taking a step of action. Regarding payday loans specifically, find out what your city's ordinances are. Find out what work is being done to try to prevent it. And maybe talk to your city council members and say, I don't want this in my city, and here's why. On a larger, and by the way, if you live in the city of Richardson, there is a group, Faith in Texas, organizing letters to go to the city council all on the same day saying, we want you to pass an ordinance that forbids predatory lending in our city. And if you're interested in a copy of the letter, you can talk to me and I'll get it to you after Shabbat. But on a larger scale, maybe your issue isn't poverty and predatory lending. Maybe it's something else. Local elections are coming up. Early voting starts April 24th, and the election is May 6th. And the people who voted Sheriff Clark out of power in the area around Selma, and the people who voted out Mayor Bull Connor in Birmingham, that was taking action. That was offering up their guilt sacrifices and doing something about it. So vote. Educate ourselves on the issues, or if you're not political, make donations of your time and money. But let us take our modern day guilt sacrifice and put it as smoke on the altar as a gift up to God. Shabbat Shalom.